Let me know if you can't hear me. I tend to talk softly sometimes. I'm going to give you a whole lot of stuff. My dad would have said 20 pounds in a 10-pound bag, and that's kind of the way it's going to be. I first want to introduce you to the concept of equilibrium, because it's really critical to understand if you want to understand social entrepreneurship. And then I'm going to talk about innovation and how we think about social entrepreneurship, how the concept of how we even approach it has evolved, and I'll try to point out some of the innovative things that went on at those things. We won't spend a whole lot of time on specific social entrepreneurs, but at the end, I have a very interesting example of a Philadelphia social entrepreneur that I just learned about. Okay, equilibrium. This is really a boring sentence, so let's start this way. Imagine you're at a farmer's market. You run a farmer's market, and you're there, and it's late May, and one of your vendors actually shows up with a few baskets of ripe Jersey tomatoes. Nobody else has them. In late May, what's the demand for ripe Jersey tomatoes? It's high. What's the supply? Low. What's the price going to be? But in August, where you can't walk without stepping on a ripe tomato, what's the price going to be? Because supply and demand will eventually balance. And there may be times when it fluctuates, but we talk about this whole concept of equilibrium. The marketplace will come to an equilibrium. That's all we need to know about that. That's also all I remember about macroeconomics. In many parts of the world, the balance isn't very fair because there are people excluded from the marketplace because of race, because of where they live. We've heard of food deserts. Because all sorts of other reasons. Bald-faced discrimination. Thus, we say that there's such a thing as an unjust equilibrium. In essence, there's a marketplace that's working for some sort of product, some sort of service, some sort of good, water, clean water, something like that. But it's unjust. And that's the world of the social entrepreneur. The social entrepreneur basically is, for whatever reason, is compelled to try to deal with changing an unjust equilibrium. Follow? We okay? Public school funding in Pennsylvania. I personally think that's an unjust equilibrium. When kids here in Radnor, the school spends $6,000 more a year per pupil than in my school district. My kids in my school district are just as worthy. Okay? Evolution of social entrepreneurship. Social entrepreneurship 1.0. The innovation here was that they started talking about the word at all, and they tried to identify those people who were moving mountains. They were doing things that made significant impact and creating a new equilibrium against all odds. Against all odds. And organizations tried to shine attention on them and their work and put them, made them heroes. And developed support systems. And Ashoka was the standard bearer for years in helping identify these people who were changing the world. And they really were made into heroes. The fact that they were identifying them at all, because social entrepreneurship, we can look back in history and identify people who were social entrepreneurs, and I'm going to use one example like that, but even the word is a relatively new word. And so this was its first iteration. Florence Nightingale. Now, nobody called her a social entrepreneur, but since she basically created the profession of nursing, we'll give her the prop. Giroux Villamoria, a young woman who was a teacher but couldn't stand what she saw for abandoned children in a big city in India, and so she created this thing that eventually changed how abandoned children were addressed all over India. And Fabio Rosa, who brought electricity to millions of rural Brazilians and changed the way the Brazilian government conceived of the right for everybody to have electricity. Heroes. 1.0. 2.0. Here's where this concept of social entrepreneurship took kind of an interesting turn. And it took the turn because wealthy people like the people who in McNeil, who, thank God we found Tylenol. If you've raised a kid without Tylenol, I don't know how you'd ever do it. The whole notion here, the innovation here was that people are out there working really hard, and people are investing money, and they want to invest money, but where's the money going? Who's doing what with the money? Is there impact? How do you measure that impact? All sorts of lessons from the business world were then sort of layered into this whole space. And it changed it dramatically because all of us, and an awful lot of people from McKinsey and other sorts of things would get out there and they would really start helping these people who were trying to change the world and organizations that were trying to change the world become better at it. And it upped the game in terms of accountability, transparency, all sorts of other really valuable things. Gates Foundation, Skoll Foundation. Examples. And your foundation, which is the same sort of thing, okay? 2.0. The innovation here is the application of concepts from a different world. From a different world. And sometimes that's where innovation comes from, is taking something from over there and knowing that it's going to work over here. Okay, 3.0, which is today. It's hard to see. That says, be the change you want to see in the world. The innovation here is that we got to stop looking for the heroes, and we got to look at the change-making potential of everybody. Everybody. And the whole concept is that people can make change where they are. They don't have to give up their job. They don't have to. They can go to, one of my former students went to work for Air Products. He's an engineering student. Went to work for Air Products up in the Lehigh Valley. And he wanted to become the thorn in the side to make that company greener. He wanted to change them. And he was going to do it from inside by being a great performer and always making these suggestions and doing those sorts of things. Everyone a change maker. Which is interesting that from 1.0, Ashoka Foundation was founded by Bill Drayton. Bill Drayton just eventually wrote the seminal article about this concept of everyone can be a change maker. One of the things that's been fascinating here, and we were chatting about it beforehand, is that there are getting to be nonprofits and for-profits that are adopting new business models that were never imagined before into this space, and it's a tremendous innovation. And I'm going to give you an example of a sell one, give one that I just discovered here in Philadelphia. Hand in Hand Sustainable Suds. I like the name. There's their product. Soap. For every product purchased, Hand in Hand donates 1 bar of soap and 1 month of clean water to a child in need. And they've been working pretty much in Haiti since they started. They're only a couple years old. This Christmas, you'll see their product in Target. That's pretty good for a company that's only a couple years old. The founders are Bill Glab and his wife, Courtney Apple. There they are with some of the young people that they've met and helped in Haiti, and she was in PR and he was in some financial thing, and they just decided that they wanted to found a company that at its core had a social purpose, but it's a for-profit company. Okay? Any questions about 1, 2, or 3, or other burning questions except macroeconomic questions?
same term tier? Is that
Well, some nonprofits, we were talking about this also, some nonprofits do find things that they can sell. And by selling those, it will fund their activities. And the National Geographic Society is a nonprofit. And I bet every one of you might have an old VCR tape at home.
come on, I don't know.
I don't know. Your parents will have a VCR tape. I do, and they sell their phenomenal documentaries and stuff to television stations and public television stations and stuff, and they make money to fund all of their research work. So there are ways that a nonprofit can make money. They can make really delicious products and sell them. Okay?
Maybe Alex's Lemonade.
Yes.
Start that way.
The interesting thing about Alex's Lemonade is that they make a product, but a product is sold, but it's usually donated. And they take the income from the donations. How many of you have had a glass or a cup, a little wax cup of Alex's Lemonade? I think it may be one of the things that unites all Americans. And now we need to find something that will unite all Americans. Any other questions? Any other observations about social entrepreneurship? The concept of you having the power to do something in the social entrepreneurial sphere, whether you go to work for PricewaterhouseCoopers or you go to work for a bank or you go anywhere, I think is one of the most eye-opening innovations. You could be a social entrepreneur at Villanova.
Right. Yes. And I think that's a great point, something for us to really think about. You know, it's not necessarily moving outside to innovate, you know, going outside of a system to innovate back in. It's like your example with Air Products, stay in the inside and innovate in there and be that change that you want to see. And I have to say, you know, I've seen it here at Villanova all the time, and I'll have to, you know, definitely, you know, recognize Dr. Wilson in the back. This is how she operates. You know, she looks at things from how can I be the change, and Bridget Boston does the same thing. So, you know, in our department, I feel like this is like our operating model of, you know, be that change. Always think about new ways to be, new ways to act, and new ways to think inside, and then the spokes come. You know, so I live that. You know, I see that every day.
I agree completely. There is a context into which we all will go and all operate. In our communities, in our work, in our schools, in our dormitory, in our apartment building. But what we bring to it is our own mindset of being the change we want to see in others. So I think it's a really worthwhile way of thinking about yourself. And it pushes you into some corners. Okay, what is really the worthy change that I'm really willing to stick my neck out for?
And two, I've been thinking a lot about if you're acting in that way, how, you know.
I'm coming over so you can get picked up on the mic.
Oh, sorry. We have one microphone.
Okay.
How do you, you know, when you're doing this in the system, you don't necessarily hear or see the impacts of that change. So you're working on your own, always asking why. Why do we do things this way? You know, look at the problem from a different angle. But you don't necessarily always get the feedback that your ideas are working. You know, so how do you stay motivated, or how do you know that you're actually innovating when you're making these decisions? You know, one example, just this week, one of our students in our program said, you know, the reason why I came here is because of Bridget. Like, she was so nice to me on the phone, and I meant to tell Bridget that, but like I forgot. Yeah, no. But like, how do you, or like Catherine does it all the time, like the way she thinks about things, and I see it or I hear it, but then I forget, a little forgetful. I forget to tell them, or, you know, how do you deal with that inside when you're doing the 3.0 model? How do you create the system then to fortify it or make
It's a great question, but I have to tell you, I'm surprised to get it from a college professor.
I'm not a typical one.
Because college professors plant seeds and never see the tree. So in some ways, it's belief, and it's choosing to be who you want to be. It's choosing to act that particular way.
Right.
It's choosing to be a thorn in someone's side, perhaps. But it's choice. But not many of us really get to see the fruits of the labor, particularly when the gestation period and the growth period and there are all those other factors that get in the way.
I think it's hard. I was interested in your background in organizational behavior in organizations. I was just at a meeting. There's a really interesting organization called EMC Arts in New York City. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I'll hold it.
And I think what's really, with the rapid pace of change, the word that you're hearing a lot, particularly in the nonprofit sector, is around adaptive change and figuring out how to constantly evolve and adapt. And I think that there's innovation with kind of a small I and innovation with a capital I, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But that innovation with a lowercase I is really trying to figure out how do you adapt and how do you change. And I think in this meeting, one of the challenges is when you're in an organization that is not very creative and is not willing to accept those ideas. And that's a lot of work. And there's a lot of tension that can happen. And how do you kind of move those ideas forward if you're in that kind of organization? And Jim will tell us all about
No,
how
I
to
won't,
do that.
but while I can tell you, that's why we call it entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurships know how to sell. And they sell, and they sell, and they sell, and they sell their ideas, and they sell, and they sell. And it's interesting because not many people get into entrepreneurship to sell. They get into entrepreneurship because they're infatuated with a product or a service or something like that. But they end up keeping the books, and they end up having human resource policies, and they end up doing cleaning the bathroom and the coffee pot, and they end up doing all the other things. But when push comes to shove, their main job is to sell their ideas. And I think that's one of the things that you have to be willing to do, and you have to open your mouth and proclaim something. And it's not like you have to wait for the big one to come along. It could be just a suggestion about recycling. It could be a suggestion about where you're sourcing your materials from. It could be a suggestion about putting out boxes to collect food around the holidays. I mean, it can just be little incremental things. And Drayton's thing in that wonderful article, Everyone a Changemaker, says it's much more impactful for the world to have everybody doing little things than to have a few people doing monstrous things. Not many of us will ever do anything that will permanently change an equilibrium, but we can certainly change an equilibrium within our own smaller space. So that's sort of where social entrepreneurship has evolved to. We love the heroes, and we still read about them. I've been given some books, and I've given other people books that tell the stories about some of them. You ought to read about Florence Nightingale, by the way. She's amazing. Any other questions before
It's fun to be here tonight. It's fun to be back in school. I do like school a lot, so it's fun to have that kind of overview and experience that framework, as Lauren was saying. And I'm not an expert in innovation either, so I'm excited to learn with you as well. My background is more in social policy. I was a political science major at LaSalle. I got my master's in public policy at the Kennedy School. I worked for the Transitional Work Corporation, which was a transitional urban jobs program for a couple of years there, and then I worked for the Pew Charitable Trust. I also was a Vincentian Service Volunteer Corps member in New York City, and I worked for Covenant House, which is a homeless shelter for youth under 21, which was an incredible experience. So, and informed a lot of, I think, how I do my work and the paths that I took. And so I was at the Pew Charitable Trust for about 5 years, and then moved to the Barra Foundation, which was a big shift in foundations. Pew is a huge organization. The Barra Foundation is, when I joined, and it still is, it's 3 full-time people and 1 half-time person. So we're small, but we're mighty. We have a terrific website that has a lot of great examples if you want to take a look. We are about a $90 million organization, so That means that Mr. McNeil put money aside back in 1963, and that money has been invested over the years and has grown to $90 million. And the IRS rules are we have to distribute 5%. So we provide about $4 million a year in grant funding in the 5-county area in, as I mentioned, arts and culture, health, human services, and education. And there are about 9,000 organizations that we could potentially fund. And I will say that most organizations think that what they're doing is innovative. Or they say that it's innovative. So innovative means a lot of things to a lot of people. And we talk about it in a very specific way at the Barra Foundation. And it goes back to our roots of Mr. McNeil and the development of Tylenol. If you think about research and development, the concept of trying something, we really think about it as a process. We think about intentional innovation. You know, you are trying something, you're testing it, you're evaluating it, and you're learning from it, and you're sharing those lessons learned, whether it succeeds or it fails. So that's how we think about innovation, and you know, furthering innovation in the nonprofit sector. We do want to be a change agent, the Barra Foundation, and we do try to work a little bit differently with our grantees. A lot of times you hear about foundations, and you'll hear that they're very transactional. You send in an application, you don't hear anything, you get the grant or you don't get the grant, you don't really understand why. So we try to be very interactive as much as we can with those, not 9,000 organizations, but the organizations that we serve and that we're able to fund. So the way that the things that we think about, the ingredients for innovation, we think about there's the need for idea generation, there's the need for selecting ideas, supporting ideas that have the potential to influence others, and then sharing that learning. So there's ingredients. It's not just a flash in the pan. It's not the next shiny new thing. It's really a process when you think about it. We do it in 3 ways. So we have 2 different grant programs, and then another approach that we have to furthering innovation in the nonprofit sector. And I'm happy to talk, after I get through this, I'll give you a couple of examples of what we funded, and then I'll talk a little bit about some of the changes that are happening in philanthropy and social enterprise and the different models that we're seeing. So we have a couple of different grant programs. We have the Barra Awards, which is core support for organizations. And that's like gold in the nonprofit sector. You know, they are always looking for money that doesn't have strings attached. So we think that it's important for organizations to have that so that they have a little bit of breathing room. You know, we provide $50,000 over 2 years to 40 organizations. So it was $2 million over 2 years, which is significant. And a $25,000 grant each year for 2 years, it enables an organization to do something real with it. We had transitioned an old grant program, which was more than 300 organizations that received between $2,000 to $15,000, mostly $2,000 grants. Not a lot of money to kind of play with, to be creative, to try new things. And in the Barra Awards, we're looking for organizations that have leadership, performance, and that word adaptability. That's really organizations that are really kind of keeping their head above the sand, looking around the corner, looking for the new idea, and they may be the potential innovators for that innovation with a capital I. The way we go about funding the Barra Awards is actually kind of unique as well. We have nominators in each of our 4 interest areas, and we intentionally call them interest areas because we think one of the key things in innovation is really that cross-fertilization of different sectors. So really kind of going out and trying to expose yourself to different kind of thinking, people who aren't from the same places as you, people who aren't from, if you're from arts and culture, you might talk with somebody from education. So really trying to get to that cross-fertilization of ideas to kind of generate some creative new ideas. So the Barra Awards, we have up to, I mentioned that. I've lost my train of thought there. So I'll just continue on with the explanation. The process in which we use to nominate organizations. We call them interest areas instead of program areas to kind of break down the silos between those four areas. And we identify up to 10 nominators in each of those areas in order to really kind of, I think the other change that's happening in philanthropy is, I always say that philanthropy has been like Oz behind the curtain. You really have, I don't know, how many people have dealt with a foundation? Has the experience felt like Oz behind the curtain? You sort of send in an application, you don't really know what happens behind the doors there, it's a little confusing. You hear about it, you don't really know how it works or how the decision's made. We are really trying to kind of decentralize it and enable other people. So the nominators we choose are experts from the field. You know, Catherine would be a great nominator, Lauren would be a great nominator, Jim would be a great nominator. Some of you would probably be great nominators. We also choose some of our former grantees. So it also enables us to have a wide variety of people who are helping to identify organizations that are out there in the community that we may not know or may not be in our networks, or maybe people from places we're not familiar with, or people who don't look like us or speak the same language as us. So it's really an interesting way to use this nominator. It's a little bit like the Genius Awards that MacArthur does. We don't give $500,000, but a little bit in that way. That's a nominating process. So those organizations get nominated, then we vet them. They have to send in an application, and they're reviewed by a review panel, and then the board ultimately approves them. But it's a really interesting group of organizations, and we hope that they might eventually apply to the Catalyst Fund. The Catalyst Fund is what I call innovation with a capital I. So that's really the risk capital. And what I've been thinking about lately is that it's really more like shift capital. So again, sometimes we're looking for new ideas or new programs that may be new and may add on to the program, but what we're really looking for are programs or initiatives that are really going to kind of shift people's thinking or shift the way an organization works or influence, kind of advance the frontiers of knowledge. That was a part of our mission statement for a long time. So it's not just the new shiny program that's going to be around for 2 years and go away. We're really looking for things that are going to kind of shift the way people do their work. That's how we think about innovation. And the Catalyst Fund, we describe it as we're looking for things that are new and different. So it can't just be a new thing. It has to be different. We talk about a break from past practice. It's a very timely opportunity. There might be new information or new research or new technology. Then we're looking for things that are better than existing solutions and things that are significant. So back to that, the ripple effect. A project that's going to have a ripple effect or change the way people think or do their work. So those are really the characteristics we're looking for in the Catalyst Fund. And then we have the Beyond the Money, which is not explicitly talked about on our website, but those are opportunities beyond the actual dollars for us to really further that culture of innovation in the community and foster that environment. So one of the things that we do is we bring together all of our grantees every year. One year it's on the Barra Award, it's a focus on the Barra Awardees, another year it's on the Catalyst Fund. And we bring them together in order to get to know people from outside of their sector. So we think of it that as a beyond the money activity. We're not giving away a grant, but we're creating an environment or an opportunity for people to interact. And it's incredible how many people don't know each other, even in this small world in Greater Philadelphia. We also had breakfast for each of our interest areas. And that was amazing too. People even in education, in each group, half of the people didn't know each other. And it's so important for people to know what resources are out there so they're not reinventing the wheel. We also, one of the things we just did, which was a great suggestion by one of our board members, was we sent 6 leaders on the Greater Philadelphia Leadership Exchange, which was it's run by the Pennsylvania Economy League, and Michael Nutter actually talks about going on that exchange and having a lot of ideas before he became mayor that really influenced his work there. So again, back to this idea about a key ingredient for us of innovation is really that exchange of ideas, kind of some breathing room to think about new things. They actually go on an exchange every other year. This year they went to Los Angeles. So it was an opportunity for leaders in the community, and a lot of it's $5,000, and they wouldn't be able to afford it on their own. So one of our board members said, hey, I've been on it. They can't afford it. We should really think about doing that as one of our Beyond the Money activities, and it was really very well received. But really having that opportunity to kind of take a step back and think. So that's how we work. Does anybody have any questions? As I break the microphone? I know. Talented like that. Yes.
3 staff, how many board members?
Good question. 11. We have 11 board members. I know. And we have a really we have a terrific board. Put this back on. We consider ourselves an independent foundation, though we do have 3 family members who are on our board, 3 children of children who are all in their 50s and 60s who are on our board, and then independent directors. And we've been really intentional about getting voices in the room who represent the organizations and the communities that we serve. So we have Matt Bergheiser is the gentleman I mentioned who's from University City District. I'm pointing to him like he's here, but he's not. Valerie Gay, who runs Art Sanctuary, which is a terrific organization that uses Black art to transform communities. Laura Williamson, who's the COO of Glenmead Trust Company, and Donna DeCarolis, who is actually the founding dean of the School of Entrepreneurship at Drexel. And we have some other board members who are in private equity, and just a really interesting mix of thoughtful people. So a couple of examples. Like I said, we have great examples on our, yes, I'm sorry. Oh, yes.
Do you ever offer mentorship opportunities for grantees to come and sort of learn from you or from your organization about sort of next steps and how to be innovative?
That's a good question. We don't do it, but the meeting I was mentioning earlier with this group, EMC Arts, that's one of they're a consulting group. They're a nonprofit consulting group, actually. And one of the things that they do is they run programs to help create frameworks and structures for organizations that are interested in kind of adaptive change and adaptive leadership, and really teach them how to think more in a more innovative way. But no, we haven't. We've talked about, there's a terrific organization, which is actually one of our Barra awardees, called the Philadelphia Youth Network. And you know, they are looking for employment opportunities every year, and we haven't, because we're only 3.5, we don't have a lot of space, so we haven't taken on an intern, but it's something we'd like to do in the future.
We can help you solve that problem real quick.
A couple of examples, and again, great stories on our website about, and really great photography, and even though we're a small staff, the women I work with are just terrific and really smart and really helpful in developing our website. So one's an oldie but a goodie, and actually not on our website, and this is an organization called Partners for Sacred Places. And did you? They started as a preservation organization, and they kind of reinvented themselves and realized that these sacred places, temples, synagogues, mosques, were really civic assets in community, and kind of went through different ways of helping these sacred places find value and communicate with people in the community. They did various training programs for organizations and leaders. And one of the things, they came to us and they said, you know, there are all of these empty sacred places in Philadelphia. There are all of these arts groups that are really clamoring for venues and space to do their work. Why don't we figure out a way to match them? So they came up with Arts and Sacred Places, and really just creative kind of online matching tool, but there needed to be some training. There was some, you know, they spoke different languages. I don't know what it means to have the kind of ballet floor that you need to do a certain performance. So they created this program, and they did a really good job. And one of the things that we see often is not a good definition of the problem, or not enough research going into, you know, what's the marketplace look like, or how's this going to play out, or how do you know that this is the problem? We'll get proposals that say, you know, the poverty rate is 28% in Philadelphia, so this is why we want to start this program. Which, that's an important statistic, but we want to know, why is the existing mechanism not working? So tell us why that mechanism isn't working and why this is going to be better than what already exists. We say, don't reinvent the wheel. Our funding is not for everybody. You know, don't reinvent the wheel for the Catalyst Fund. But the Partners for Sacred Places did a really good job. We actually funded them to do some planning work, and we'll do that sometimes to help them identify to figure out what's the supply and the demand. Are people really interested in doing this? And they actually were able to, it's been replicated in Chicago. So some really, really interesting work there. And I think just a creative reuse of space. You know, they weren't reinventing the wheel. They were trying to figure out, how do we use these existing resources and assets to do something and add value to the sector. The second example is the workshop school. So the workshop school was started by, one of the things we'll look at too is, you know, leadership's really important. Is it the right organization? Is it the right leader? So the workshop school was started by 4 gentlemen who were all in education. One was an engineer turned math teacher, and he worked at West Philly High. And he found that he was doing this after-school program teaching kids how to build cars, hybrid cars. And he was amazed at how much kids learned in this process. And he and his other colleagues got together and said, someday we'd love to start a school. Well, they figured it out. They decided to start a school. They did the fundraising they needed to do. They talked to the school district. They got an agreement. And they started a school called the Workshop School, which is totally project-based learning. So not your typical lecture standing up here like we're doing right now, but giving you kind of what we're going to do at the end of the night, giving you a problem, working on it, and then learning math and science and all of that from there. Really kind of very different way of, not a lot of schools like that in the school district of Philadelphia. really creating a tremendous opportunity. And they've been able to, they also were going to be sustainable, and I'm not a fan of that word because I think it's really tough to do in the nonprofit sector. But because they were part of the school district, they were getting per pupil funding. So they were not going to have to fundraise year in and year out. They're a really great program if you want to look at them. Another example is, and I thought this would be a good one because we're in a university, and this one is affiliated with Widener University. It's called Bridges and Boundaries. And Chester is the second poorest city in, no, it's the poorest city in Pennsylvania. It's the second hungriest congressional district in the country. And it's not too far from us. And there have been, so Widener in a university community partnership, you know, you don't have it out here because you're out on the main line, but I had this experience at LaSalle where there were tensions between the university and the community. And there were opportunities to get engaged. So university and community partnerships are not new. But what Widener wanted to do with Chester was they wanted to use a different way of approaching it. They wanted to use what's called civic arts methodologies to engage the community. So rather than just have a focus group, they were doing things like, I actually went to one of these workshops where they created a human Mandela, I can never say that right. Do you know what I'm talking about? Okay. It was all different people from the community, from the school, and where you stood around and you walked around the circle a number of times, and then you all went into the middle of the circle and just, sounds kind of weird, but you kind of like touched each other and you just made a shape. But it was this really interesting way to interact with people that you had never interacted with before. So civic arts methodologies are using kind of theater and dance and movement to really engage people. So this was something we thought would not just affect Widener, but it would also potentially influence other university community partnerships. And it was a great partnership between Sharon Mayer, who was at Widener, and then a local entrepreneur from the community by the name of Devin Walls. Any questions about those examples?
I have a question about, so you said a part of the application process, you know, is kind of like the after, like the measuring or like kind of outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
So like in that one that you were just describing at Widener, I mean, how do you, when looking at applications, determine or like, can you speak a little bit about the success or
Mm-hmm.
how you measure success in that?
Yeah, I think they were looking for kind of levels of engagement among folks. They were looking for different arts projects that took off from that particular engagement. I would say another success, and this is something we look at because a lot of it's early stage funding, you know, if they get funded again, if they attract other funders, if they continue to do their good work. Now, some things should not continue and they should go away and not get funded anymore. And I think that's a lot harder in the nonprofit community. But one of the interesting things that happened with Chester is, and this is an example of innovation that's happening in philanthropy, if you think about social enterprise and social entrepreneurs, and we are seeing more hybrid organizations. So we are seeing B corporations, which are benefit corporations. We're seeing for-profits that are doing good work. And Chester, Devin Walls, there was a workshop done through Bridges and Boundaries, and it turned out that Judy Wicks from the White Dog Cafe, everybody knows where that is. That's where my office is, right above it. But Judy Wicks is friendly with the former CEO of Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream, Chuck Lacey, and Judy and Chuck and Ben Cohen are on a board together. And they actually make all equity investments in social enterprises. It's called the Barra Foundation. So Chuck was at an event and met Devin and was thought he was such an amazing entrepreneur, decided to start investing in Chester. They're creating an arts district there. And the Barra Foundation actually, so our initial funding created that opportunity. Who would have known that would have happened? This is an unknown outcome that comes out of things that you're not really sure. But what we just did was we made what's called an impact investment. We called a program-related investment into New Day Chester, which is they will use the money to rehab the 6 buildings that they purchased to create this arts district. So we are giving them a $250,000 loan. They'll pay us interest on the loan, interest only, so they'll pay us $10,000 a year. And then at the end of 5 years, they'll pay us back because eventually they'll be generating enough revenue, there'll be a coffee shop, there'll be apartments, that they'll be able to pay us back. And that's one of the trends that I think is happening in social entrepreneurship and social enterprise. Foundations are starting to understand, well, you know, I can recycle my dollars. And there's a movement where I mentioned earlier that we're a $90 million organization. Only $4 million goes to the organizations and the mission and, you know, the charities that we're supporting. And what's happening to that other 95% of the dollars? It's invested in the stock market. It's invested in hedge funds. There are a lot of people getting really wealthy on our investments. There's a pretty big movement in the foundation community to think about, and this is hard though, culture change when it comes to innovation is hard, really hard, because there is a mindset that money is supposed to make the money to give to the organizations. That's the mindset of the board. So I think that your question about the board, having the right board is really key too in supporting that nonprofit innovation.
And the 5% rule comes from the law that says that you have to spend at least, right? At least 5%.
Right.
So that's what everybody does. But it's not.
Some people give more.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Some people will give based on their income for the year. That whole notion of the investing and getting just interest back and then eventually getting your funds back was part of the 2.0 level of the social entrepreneurship. And many organizations were willing to negotiate the terms as a social entrepreneur was having more and more impact. They'd stretch it out. They'd even sometimes forgive some of the loan because of the impact. The incentive was there to have greater impact. But that was the innovations like that were when business people and business methods came in during the 2.0 phase.
But you need to be willing to work with the communities. Our program officers work very differently. You have to be open and transparent. You have to build trust, because if you're trying something new, it might not work the first time. And to be able to have that open conversation with your program officer is oftentimes, you know, I was in development, I was in fundraising. You wanted to put your best foot forward. You didn't really want to show your warts or your blemishes in your report, but you have to if you're funding this kind of work. So that's enough for me. Any other questions?
Yeah, other questions.
So one thing that I'm wondering about, but actually just thinking about program officers, what's your philosophy about when you underspend on a grant? So let's say you have a funder or a project that you're funding, and the project is able to be done with like 70% of the grant. I know with Pew, in my experience, there's a lot of itemized reporting going on.
Yep.
We have to give back the money if we don't spend it. Do you think what's the Barra Foundation's, I guess, philosophy on that? Do you think that there should be a way that
They can keep the money. If you do a good job and you're able to spend less money.
Innovative project.
Right. It's interesting you asked that. We funded a project right now where it was more of it was a planning process for them to look into an innovative model. I don't want to say which organization it is. But they went through the process and they said, you know what? We're not going to do this. It's not the right time. So we gave them a $75,000 grant. We released $50,000. They've spent $40,000. So I just had this conversation with my board chair, and the program officer said, you know, we should reward them for being honest and for not continuing with the project, because let's reward this good behavior, because these are decisions they should be making. So that's a conversation we'll have in December. We're thinking that we'll let them keep the money they have, the $10,000, then we won't release the last $25,000. But organizations will return. They usually don't have much money left over, but so we'll get a return check every once in a while. But we will talk with organizations. We're not as bureaucratic as Pew. We don't have to be. Did you have a question in the back?
Yeah, I just have a quick question. So the foundation landscape in Philadelphia, what is that social equity idea floating around there? How does it look in other foundations? Are they going out and maybe looking at 7% with 2% going into social equity, or are they just, nay?
Not really. There are some. So there's one organization called the Patricia Kime Family Foundation. Do you know them?
Yeah, they fund my organization.
Oh, cool. Great. What's your organization?
Mercy Volunteer Corps.
Oh, all right, good. But
I love when stuff like that happens.
Yeah. Laura McKenna, I know Laura McKenna, we go way back. She used to be the nurse practitioner at LaSalle when I was a student there. That's Philadelphia for you.
And Tina and I went to Gwen.
Yeah, we went to high school together. But she has been so vocal about this. She has been really pushing people, and she's yelled at me a number of times. You're not moving fast enough. You should be making a PRI. You haven't done it soon enough. And it's really getting your board to understand it. And so I had to get comfortable with the language because it's different. There are PRIs, there are MRIs, and my committee chair for my investment committee used to be head of a huge asset firm. My background's not in investments. So I needed to kind of educate myself first before, and I think that's a big barrier to some of this work, that most of us EDs come from social policy or social work or the arts, and we have a hard time speaking that, or it's scary, it's investments and we don't know what equity means. So I think that that's a big barrier, and one of the other barriers is the investment advisors you're working with, they're not really that jazzed about. Some of them are. There are some boutique firms that are coming up that are interested in it, but they're more familiar with the traditional stocks and bonds and hedge funds. But I think there's a really good move. The Untours Foundation is another really interesting foundation if you're interested in looking them up. They only give low interest loans to social enterprises. So they funded things like Wash Cycle Laundry, if you're familiar with them, which has a triple bottom line. Untours Foundation. And Elizabeth Killow and Laura have been really kind of going out and trying to get other funders to see the light when it comes to impact investing. But if there's an organization called Mission Investors Exchange, which is the go-to place for foundations that are interested in this work. I also just I was telling Jim that at the Mission Investors Exchange conference, I met this foundation called the Tony Wells Foundation, which is in Columbus. And they do a lot of interesting financing, and they do a workshop, a 3-day executive ed program for social entrepreneurs that are trying to figure out how to structure their organization. And I learned a lot of new things. They were talking about trademarking, LLCs and B corporations. There are a lot of different configurations that you can create. And actually, in the foundation world, not everybody's creating a foundation anymore. I think the Omidyar Network has created an LLC. There are other organizations that think that there's more flexibility if you have a limited liability corporation rather than a private foundation. So there's a lot of shifts happening.
Could you speak to social impact bonds a little bit?
Oh. I could.
Yes, you can.
So does anybody have you heard of social impact bonds or pay for success? So people talk about that as it is impact investing, and essentially what happens is it's the government. So let's say there's a reentry program, and you will get private investors to pay for the program, and if they meet certain outcomes, then that private investor will get reimbursed by the government. So you're only paying for instead of paying for beds or jobs, you're paying for the outcomes that you wish to see. That's a really simplified version of it. I mean, I think you're seeing more of it. I don't know if there are 25 programs throughout the country, but it's really about getting models that work to scale.
Right, and it's using the bond approach to getting investors involved, so it's this 3-tiered approach.
Bonds kind of a misnomer. I think the person who created it is not happy that they called it a social impact bond, but it is about getting other investors to kind of pay in advance.
Investment, so you're gonna have investors, hedge funds, provide the seed.
Right.
Which is one of the things that I was always so frustrated with. So in my house, it's CFO, gets this money from angel investors.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I mean, we have foundations in the nonprofit world.
Right.
But that's if you've proven success. So that's why I love
That's
what
right.
you do.
That's right.
Because it's planting the seed at the beginning.
Right.
So one of the things that I think is attractive about the social impact bond is it allows you to be creative
Mm-hmm.
on the front end without having to.
That's right.
That's one of the things that I like.
Social Finance is an organization, if you're interested in social impact bonds, they do a lot of work there. There's resources out there to look at pay for success models.
Mm-hmm. And BLab, does everybody know that BLab is right down the street? I mean, it's practically a half a mile from you, which I think is so interesting that Wayne is this little social entrepreneurship hub. BLab is the organization.
That's right. We've got the White Dog, we've got the Barra Foundation, we've got
We
BLab.
need to have Friday happy hours
That's
and
a good-
just solve everything.
Maybe we should. I like that idea.
But,
Sounds like a beyond the money activity to me.
right? At White Dog, the BLab is, so they're the accreditor.
So BLab is they certify you if you're a B corporation. How many people have heard of a B corporation? So B corporations or benefit corporations are the parallel to C corporations. So you hear about corporate, C corporations where, you have to maximize. And actually, I didn't know all this until I went to this workshop. You have to maximize shareholder value. It is basically you can get sued if you don't maximize shareholder value.
He was right.
But the benefit corporation, what it does is it enables you to make money, but also creates other opportunities for you to have environmental outcomes, governance, kind of how you treat your employees. So what the BLab does is certifies those organizations that want to become benefit corporations. So they're the certifier.
And the company makes, increases or maximizes shareholder value.
Right.
But is not limited to only focusing on that. There's this other social impact, social good that is allowed.
Right. That's why Ben & Jerry's didn't sell. They sold to Unilever, and
Yes.
they did it because they would have gotten sued. It would have gone to the courts. But they were disappointed because they were afraid it wasn't going to maintain the benefits they had for their employees. But actually what ended up happening was it actually changed Unilever's culture in the end.
That's the magic that little thing came under.
Pretty
the tent.
amazing.